Every great marketer has been faced with this moment, an opportunity to exhibit bravery in the midst of uncertainty, or to take a risk on something they truly believed in. The Brave Marketer podcast features today's most progressive marketers and uncovers the brave marketing moments that have shaped their careers and the brands they've influenced. Hosted by Brave Software and Never Stop Marketing, and me, your host, Donnie DeVoren. Together we'll discover the decision-making process and mindset work that led to their success. Hi everyone, you're listening to a new episode of the Brave Marketer podcast, and this one is sure to offer you something very different from our previous few episodes. Today we're going to talk about the topic of ad fraud, and we're speaking with a thought leader in the industry who is on a mission to stop brands from falling prey to it. So I think you're going to really like it. But before we hop into today's episode, we want to highlight our Brave Pick of the Week. Every week we choose a brand that has run an ad campaign with Brave as our Pick of the Week, and this week we're choosing Gala Games. Gala is on a mission to enable freedom for anyone on this planet through play, and their goal is to raise awareness and attract new users to the gaming platform via Brave ads. Our users have been loving their creative, and we're excited to partner with them on upcoming projects in the future. So now let's get into this week's episode. You're going to meet Dr. Augustine Fou, a cybersecurity and ad fraud investigator who helps his clients increase the productivity of their ads by detecting and mitigating all of ad fraud and waste. He's also a digital marketer of 25 years and regularly contributes to Forbes. And Dr. Fou was the chief digital officer of Omnicom's healthcare consultancy group, a $100 million group of 8 agencies serving pharma, medical devices, and healthcare clients. This podcast series is brought to you by Brave, a reimagined browser where you can earn frequent flyer-like tokens for just surfing the net. Now for today's episode of The Brave Marketer. Dr. Fou, welcome to the Brave Marketer podcast. How are you doing today?
Great. Thanks, Donnie. Thanks for having me on.
So why don't we jump right into it? The Brave Marketing podcast is all about picking out that moment when you decided to be brave. And I think you have a really great story and maybe one of the bravest people in digital advertising because of what you're doing. So why don't you tell the audience about what are you doing? What is that brave moment and how you got here?
Thanks. My brave moment would be when I decided to really focus on this problem of ad fraud. So I think everyone's heard of the problem of digital ad fraud. For me, I fell into it because as a digital marketer and also as a scientist, I'm used to looking at analytics. And the analytics in 2012, 2013 were going awry because I started to notice in the campaign details things like 50% click-through rates, and in some cases 100% click-through rates. And as a marketer who's been doing digital marketing for a long time, we know that humans don't click on ads that much. In some cases, they really don't like the ads at all. So when you see 100% click-through rates, you got to ask some questions. And at the time, when I started asking, no one could tell me why. Everyone just thought, wow, our campaigns are performing really awesome. So they just ignored it and just let it keep going. When I started looking into this, we were finding out that these clicks were clearly not from humans. They were from bots. So bots were not only causing the ads to load, but also clicking on them to simulate engagement. Since then, it's been kind of a long 8 to 9 years doing this. It's been challenging because a lot of times the ad tech companies, the marketers, the agencies really don't want to hear about this, right? Because it's much easier to just keep doing what they're doing and not have to deal with something or have to go back and tell the client, whoops, there was some fraud in your campaign, right? So it's been pretty challenging to maintain this research.
Let's talk about that part a little bit. Everybody knows that there's digital ad fraud out there. All the articles say it. Every conference, there's usually like a section on brand safety or ad fraud. If it's a known issue, why do you think the agencies or brands, don't want to dive deep into it?
I think there's 2 ways to think about this. One is that they believe that fraud is low because the trade associations keep telling them fraud is low, right? The year after year annual reports keep saying it's in the 1% range. It's almost like, don't worry about it, it's under control. But I'll explain in a second why there's way more fraud than they think there is, right? Because they're not seeing it in the data. The second is pretty common among the marketers that I've talked to. They assume it's someone else's problem, right? They say, oh, my agency keeps telling me that my campaigns are fine. So we know there's fraud, but we think it's someone else's problem, right? It doesn't affect us. So it's really the combination of those 2 things that cause them to just keep doing what they're doing and not look closer. The example I said before, where there's a lot of different kinds of fraud rather than just IVT, right? So a lot of the fraud detection tech companies are tuned for looking for bots or invalid traffic, IVT. If you're only looking for bots, you're going to miss a lot of the other forms of fraud that are not bots, right? Typically, in the early days of fraud, we have these fake websites that don't have any humans visiting. So therefore, they have to buy all their traffic, and that's where the bot traffic comes in. These technologies were tuned for looking for bots coming to web pages. However, if you think about the new categories of digital advertising, like mobile apps and things like that in CTV, if a flashlight app, a keyboard app, or an alarm clock app is loading a bunch of ad impressions in the background, that's not technically a bot hitting a web page. So if the technologies that are used to detect fraud are only looking for bots hitting a web page, they're going to miss these other forms of fraud, like mobile app fraud and things like that. And there's also things that publishers do. So the owners of the website, they have a motive to increase their own ad revenue. So there's many other ways they can cheat, not just by buying bot traffic, but they can also do ad stacking, where they stack 50 ads on top of each other so that they can earn more money. They can do pixel stuffing, where they're sticking an entire web page in a 1x1 pixel or 0x0 pixel. So it's not actually visible, even though it can load many more ads. Or they're doing things like pop unders or pop-ups and just all manner of cheating that's not technically bots hitting a web page. Long story short, I think some of these technology companies have evolved, but they're still very much tuned for looking for IVT, right? They keep reporting to you the invalid traffic. And if they're only doing so, that's why you're seeing only the 1%. But the other forms of fraud could be multiples of that. You could see 20, 30, 40 more percent fraud if you're looking for those other things. So that's why I think the marketers have been complacent about it and have really not taken aggressive action against fraud, even though they've heard about it and they know it exists.
So, on a typical average, let's say display campaign or CTV campaign, how bad is it?
I've seen everything. So everyone asked me that question, and I'm going to basically give you a range. And the reason for that is it really is up to how closely monitored the campaign is and how well it was set up to begin with. So on one side of the spectrum, we have agencies that are very conscientious and they're using very strict whitelists. And when they do that, essentially most of the ads go to good websites, the ones that are not cheating, and they're not buying bot traffic, they're not doing pixel stuffing or ad stacking or all those other things. So when you start with that, then fraud is very low, right? It could be in the 1% to 3% range. I find for the larger marketers, right, meaning the largest marketers, the biggest brands who spend the most dollars, they are so desperate to get as much quantity as possible and as low cost as possible that the only place they can get large, super large quantities, like hundreds of billions of ad impressions at very low cost, is in programmatic and from fraudulent sites. And that's basically for a very simple reason. If you think about legitimate publishers, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, the Hearst publications, Condé Nast publications, there's only a finite amount of humans on Earth, first of all. And there's only a finite amount of humans that go to their sites that generate a finite number of page views that therefore generate a finite number of ad impressions. Those don't grow very quickly. So when you need very large scale quantities of ad impressions, the only places you can find that are in programmatic, because those fake sites or fraudulent sites are basically just using bot traffic to generate as much traffic and ad impressions as you need. And also, because they don't have cost of content, because they're not real publishers, they didn't actually have writers write the content or editors edit it and things like that. So that's why they can sell the ads for very cheap. So on the one hand, you have super large quantities. On the other hand, you have very cheap prices. So that's really the reason why the biggest marketers end up having way more fraud in their campaigns, because they want to buy it. They want to buy large quantities at low prices, but yet they're using fraud detection companies that can't detect anything. So they come back with reports that say it's 1% fraud, don't worry about it. It's kind of this perpetual cycle that has kept growing in the last couple of years. It's made the problem worse and worse.
Got it. And just to get really specific, in one of your decks in Marketing Science, you have this example from Uber. Can you walk us through the Uber story?
That's a great example, and one of the very few stories that have actually been documented with details. For Uber, one of their analytics people, Kevin Frisch, found the fraud because he was actually running some experiments. So he turned off some of their spend, I think it was on a weekly basis, and noticed that there was no change. Basically, Uber at the time was paying a whole bunch of mobile exchanges to get them more app installs. And as a marketer, they thought they were being very clever by only paying when they got the install, right? Typically, marketers would have to pay for the ad impressions. Some of them will say, oh, we won't pay for the ads, we'll just pay for the clicks, right? Because that's kind of performance in their mind. And then in this case, Uber said, we won't even pay for the clicks. We will only pay when we get the install. That's called CPI. They were running CPI campaigns with mobile exchanges, cost per install. And when Kevin turned off or paused the digital spending, he noticed there was no change in the rate of installs. They were still getting the install. And long story short, people were installing the Uber app because they wanted to install the Uber app. We call those organic installs because they wanted to install it anyway, not because they saw an ad and clicked on the ad and then installed it. What ended up happening is that a lot of these mobile exchanges were essentially ripping off Uber by doing a couple of things. First is falsifying placement reports. They would deliberately edit the placement reports, even though the ads ran on bad sites or fake sites or fraudulent sites. They would edit it to make it look like it ran on legitimate sites. So that's falsifying the reports. In some cases, they were fabricating the reports. That means that no ads were even run. They were just literally making up the Excel spreadsheets and sending it back to the client saying, oh yeah, we ran all these ads. This is how many clicks you got and how many installs you got. Some of them were cheating in that way. And there was a very specific example where Funware were getting too greedy. So Funware sued Uber for non-payment on invoices. But unfortunately, the invoices were basically based on ads that never ran. So Funware was billing Uber for ads that never ran and clicks they never got. So Uber sued them back, and that was the case that's been settled. The larger case where Uber is suing 100 mobile exchanges is still in process. But the one case against Funware, Uber won outright. But note, Funware is still a public company. PHUN is symbol. So these things still go on, and unless marketers look at their data more closely, they're also going to be ripped off because the fraud detection tech companies are simply not catching it.
Let's get back to you, Dr. Fou. In our industry, to oversimplify it, there's buyers and there's sellers. There's people selling media and people buying media. And you're coming at it another angle, almost like this, I don't want to say police officer, but you're angering a lot of people basically on both sides. You explain why agencies and brands may not want to see this and turn a blind eye. And then you're also on the seller side, what seller wants to be caught that their inventory is invalid for all these reasons that you mentioned. So that to me is like the bravest part of what you're doing. Have you been in any situations where people have gotten really upset with you personally?
Constantly. That really is the issue here. There's a couple of interesting topics here, which is one is you have to be truly independent, right? Because if you're one of the middlemen or if you're making money off of this, you can't be truly independent. So it gets back to a decision I had to make in 2012 when I started this. I had to make the business model decision. I decided, even though I have these technology tools, I call it Fou Analytics right now, but even though I have these tools, I didn't want to become a fraud detection technology company like the Double Verifies or the Integral Ad Science, right? These are companies that are now venture funded and they decided to become fraud detection tech companies. But if you think about it for a minute, those fraud detection companies rely on fraud to continue so that they can keep making money from it. And in fact, both of those companies are going public, whereas I'm still sitting here at home trying to put food on the table. So it's a very difficult business decision to have to make. But I decided I'm not going to become a fraud detection tech company so I don't incur that conflict of interest. So that's why you hear me calling myself an ad fraud researcher. I have a set of tools because I need my own tools because I don't trust anyone else's data. And these are the tools that I'm now opening up to others to use. So some large advertisers, pharmaceutical company, cosmetics company, they're now using this as their own analytics tool so that they can monitor their own campaigns and not have to take the word of their agency or the fraud detection tech companies that they already use to help them solve the fraud problem. So independence is one key thing. And the second is, if you think about all the middlemen, right? You said they're angry with me. Yes, they're certainly angry with me because all of them make more money from the volume or the flow that passes through their systems. So think about an ad exchange. Even if they saw the fraud, if no one's asking them about it, they're not going to voluntarily cut out the fraud because that just means less revenue for them. So everyone in between, the buyer, meaning the advertiser, and the seller of the ad impressions, the publishers, everyone in between is really not going to aggressively go after fraud because that's going to mean less revenue, less money for them. But surprisingly, even the marketers themselves, the buyers of the ads who are spending the money to buy these ads, you would think that they would care. But unfortunately, what I've observed over the last 8 years is that many marketers don't really care that much either because the marketers who work at big CPG companies, their job is to spend it all. Right. And we jokingly say at the end of the year, oh, well, you've got X dollars you have to spend before the end of the year, because if you don't spend it, you're going to lose it, meaning you're not going to get the budget next year. So some of these marketers, their job is to actually spend it all, not to look very carefully to see if there's any fraud involved in how to improve the marketing. But that's not to say that there's not good marketers, good people who work at the agencies. I'll focus on that for a second. The people who work at agencies, the people who work at ad exchanges, I don't blame them for perpetuating the fraud or for looking the other way. And that's because most of them are trying to do the right thing. They're trying to keep their jobs. They're trying to put food on the table. But in some cases, their bosses have told them, even if you see the fraud, don't speak up about it because that's going to make us look bad in front of the clients. I know of many cases of people who work at big media agencies told to keep quiet about this stuff. And in fact, some have lost their jobs because they decided to speak up about it and tell the clients about it. So I know they're hardworking people. They're trying to do the right thing, but they're being brave. They have to try to do their best given the context, right? Given where they work. Yes, you're right. There's a lot of people who are angry with me. I'm not supposed to say these things. I'm not supposed to reveal these hard truths. But I think that in looking forward a little bit, if we can, I think that the virus and the pandemic has shaken up everything. Whereas people prior to 2020 were not willing to rock the boat, I think the boat's already been rocked by the virus. So now, for the first time, more marketers are taking a closer look. And that's actually a good thing because when they take a closer look for themselves, they'll actually see where the problems are and they'll figure out how to solve them going forward. So I think we're going to get to a state of better digital marketing.
Yeah. So just tell me the connection between COVID and having a tighter look at their marketing spend.
In 2020, some of the marketers paused spend, right? There's a great case now. Airbnb turned off $800 million of digital spending. Okay, 800. By the end of 2020, the CEO, in the last quarterly analyst report, they said they saw 95% of their site traffic come back, right? 95% of the 2019 traffic levels are back with no media spending at all. So what he's saying is that going forward, we're clearly not going to spend as much. And what we do spend, we're going to spend more carefully. And I think it's going to be primarily around branding as opposed to they were going for performance and hyper targeting and all that kind of stuff. A lot of the stuff that we hear about in digital, like, oh, you can get the right ad to the right person at the right time, has led to all these privacy issues because now the ad tech companies are collecting all sorts of data about the people, right? About humans as they're visiting websites, as they're searching for stuff. And all of that is gathered without the consent of the user, without their knowledge, and also without recourse, right? So what if an ad tech company has incorrect data about you? There's no way you can contact them. You don't even know who has your data, let alone being able to contact them and correct the incorrect information. All these things are hand in hand because on the one side, the ad tech companies are collecting the data without permission and without consent. On the other side, they're selling that data for ad targeting purposes to the marketers. The marketers are paying extra for that. But a lot of that data, the data is not clean. The data is dirty. And then the insights and the inferences from that are also inaccurate. So then you come full circle to say, oh, well, you're using all this targeting data, but what if the targeting data were inaccurate? The targeting is not working as you thought it would work. advertisers are paying more for that. They're then paying on top of that for the fraud detection services. So all of these extra costs, all of this targeting would have been completely unnecessary if the marketers actually stuck with buying ads from real publishers that had real human audiences to begin with, right? So we kind of went down this downward spiral for the last 10 years. A lot of that was fueled by the shiny objects, or let's just put it bluntly, the snake oil that was sold by the ad tech companies to make more money off of the marketers. All of this stuff works hand in hand with the fraud because you needed the volume, you needed the bots to pretend there were clicks so that the marketers feel like they were getting engagement, therefore they spend more money in programmatic and all that kind of stuff. So it's really this spiral that's been happening for the last 10 years that I think finally we might have an opportunity to unwind, because for the first time, the marketers paused their ad spending. They would never do that voluntarily, right? But because of the pandemic, they had to in 2020. So now as they're starting to turn things back on, they're being a little bit more cautious about it, and they're taking a harder look at what to turn back on. So that's why I think I'm optimistic going forward.
Yeah. So it's almost like the colliding of two worlds where you have COVID and let's turn off some media spend, and then privacy has just been coming up and up. And
these are external factors, right, that are really making big waves in our industry now.
Yeah, surveillance capitalism is a problem in privacy, and I just wish there was a browser out there that didn't track its users.
Yes. I'm using Brave all day long, and when I open a new tab and I see the full page ad, that has impact. And I liken that to TV ads, where it's not just this little ad that's 300 by 250 off on the right-hand side. Humans are very well practiced at ignoring the banner ads, and even when they're on their mobile device, they're pretty much scrolling past pretty quickly, so they're not even paying attention to the ad as they're scrolling by. There's been these attention studies that talk about the coverage on the screen is a very large factor in brand lift, brand recall, and things like that. So when you have a full tab ad, that's actually very impactful. In fact, I remember many of them, all these different ads. Hopefully more marketers will get back to these kind of blocking and tackling, right? Basic things. If you have a good ad creative, if you have good screen coverage, not a tiny little banner ad on the right-hand side or something, then you're going to actually have better outcomes than all the targeting in the world that you put on top of it, because the targeting parameters weren't correct or accurate in the first place.
Obviously, there's issues with programmatic. So if you're a marketer out there and you don't have access to Fou Analytics or some of the other bot detection companies, where are the easiest places to spend money where you feel like nothing's going to be ad fraud free, but how would you list it as far as the best places to spend money?
I would answer that question as a small business owner or as a DTC marketer, because small business owners can't afford to spend the next $100 if the first $100 didn't drive some kind of outcome that's measurable for them. And same thing with direct-to-consumer DTC advertisers. They are really focused on the sales. If the digital marketing didn't drive the sales, they're not going to invest in it. So in those two cases, I would say, and again, I'm going to speak as a small business owner that has actually run these campaigns myself. If you're going to do search ads, do it on google.com and turn off search partners, Google Display Network, and things like that. The reason for that is if the ad loads on google.com, Google makes the money, and the fraud bots are not going to waste their time causing ads to load on google.com. So this kind of fraudulent activity due to bot activity is going to be much lower. Similarly on Facebook, if you're going to do display ads, limited to Facebook itself, the main property in the main app, and that includes Instagram and WhatsApp. And you turn off FAN, Facebook Audience Network, because everything outside of Facebook has a motive and the means to inflate their own ad revenue by using bot activity. Whereas again, if the ad loads on Facebook, these fraud bots are not going to be very active in doing that. And then finally, if you want to do video advertising, you should think about YouTube. Basically curate the channels and the creators yourself. Because if you spray everything across all of YouTube, you're going to run into major brand safety issues. There's literally beheading videos, and there's other way inappropriate stuff on there. Despite MRC accrediting them for content level brand safety, right? That's total BS. So those kinds. And then I actually am a big fan of Brave ads, the full page new tab ads, because those achieve the branding effect. And I've recommended that to certain clients that just need the branding and the awareness. They've gone too far. The pendulum has swung too far to the hyper-targeting side of things. They now need to balance that back out with more branding and better branding. And so Brave ads would be one of the examples.
And what you just laid out is actually a really nice marketing mix, because you have SEM on Google, which is obviously text ads. Then you have display or video on Facebook. And then you have video on YouTube. We didn't actually plan this, but yes, running on Brave, and that unit is called the sponsored image, which is like our homepage takeover unit, is obviously an image. And so that is actually a really nice mix. And every dollar you're spending goes to real humans, or at least mostly humans.
Yeah, and on top of that, I would recommend brands also think about their SEO, right? This organic search, because if you're running paid ads and someone clicks through to your site and you have nothing there, right? No content, nothing useful to them. That's actually a worse experience. So in addition to the paid advertising, marketers should make sure they have enough content so that when someone does click through, when they express interest in them, when they arrive on your site or when they arrive on your landing page, they actually get something out of it, get some extra value out of it. If that's missing, you're probably not harvesting all the demand. So I'll use one final example. I've seen over the years that when a big advertiser of digital cameras is doing advertising, but they don't have good SEO in place, they literally don't have enough content in place. When someone does a search for digital cameras, they'll end up finding their competitor. Or when they go to Amazon to search for digital cameras, they'll end up seeing that their competitor has better reviews on their products, and they'll end up buying the competitor's products. That's really a reason why I tell marketers, make sure you have the right balance. Don't just be spending only on paid. You have to make sure you have the right content for SEO purposes, so when people come looking for you, they can find something of value. And then furthermore, have good reviews or ask for reviews on it so that they can actively choose your product when they're actually ready to buy.
Got it.
So all of those things work together.
In closing, just one last final question, more rapid fire, is what do you think the biggest challenge right now marketers are facing, and what do you think the biggest opportunity is?
It's a good way to recap. The challenge is still the fraud problem, and they don't really realize it. Like I said before, they assume it's someone else's problem, and they assume it doesn't affect them because the trade associations have kept telling them everything's low, don't worry about it. So I think the challenge is the fraud. And the opportunity is for the marketers to take a closer look and just say, even if the trade associations tell me it's fine, I should probably look more closely to see if I'm being affected by fraud. And some of that has to go beyond the fraud detection tech companies, because like we said before, they may not be looking for everything. If the technology is tuned for looking for IVT or bots, invalid traffic, they're missing out on all the other forms of cheating that go on. And all of that's still going to be eating up your ad budgets. So for marketers, they need to look at incrementality. They need to look at whether they're getting incremental sales from their digital marketing activities. And they need to look more closely at their own analytics. If they're not currently getting detailed placement reports, they definitely should be getting them. Otherwise, you don't even know where your ads ran. And your ads could end up on Breitbart, on porn sites, on disinformation sites, on fake news sites, all of that kind of stuff. So it's really about doing a little more homework so that they can really see the value of digital advertising.
And finally, how can marketers listening to this and they want to learn more outside of the regular IVT, how do they contact you?
They can find more information on Fou Analytics, so FOU Analytics with an S.com. There's a few links on there for background information, and I'm on Twitter all day long, so the Twitter handle is ACFOU in case they want to chat with me or ask some hard questions. Happy to answer anytime.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Dr. Fou, for coming on the Brave Marketer podcast. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Donnie.
Hopefully you enjoyed today's episode talking to Dr. Fou. I think the work that he's doing is really quite incredible because not a lot of people have been fighting the fraud, and it does take someone very brave to do it. And I just want to thank you for tuning into this week's episode of the Brave Marketer podcast. If you like what you heard today and found it valuable, it'd be super helpful if you took 2 minutes to leave us a short review on Apple Podcasts, because every review counts in helping us to get our show in more ears. And on a final note, if you have a brand, a product, or service that you'd like to get in front of a valuable audience, consider Brave, the world's first global ad platform built on privacy. And you can just email us at adsales@brave.com or visit brave.com/brave ads and let us know if you're a podcast listener to unlock special pricing. Thanks.